go ahead and get started with our webinar this afternoon. I want to welcome you all. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Betsy Hill, President and Chief Operating Officer of the BrainWare Company. And with me today is Roger Stark, the company's CEO.
Good afternoon. Delighted everyone to take their time. We know it's valuable, and we really appreciate your time today.
Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording today's webinar, and a link to the archived version will be available within a day or so. Also, we are happy to provide a copy of the slides to those who are attending today. You will get those automatically if you are on the call today, on the webinar today. If you are watching this as a recording, you can contact us to request a copy of the slides, and that information will be included at the end of the webinar. Please, it looks like most people have managed to find the chat window, so that's great. You can use that to type in any questions that come up as we go along. We'll try to answer them along the way or at the end. And finally, if you would like a certificate of participation that you can use for professional development purposes, sometimes we have educators and others who want to have that, just type the word certificate or something like that into the chat window, and we'll pull that information afterwards, and you'll be getting, you can get a certificate of participation.
Yeah, CPU credit, that's right. One of the other things we want to mention at the end, you'll have an opportunity to rate your time with us today and give us a little feedback. And we live on feedback, so we certainly want to hope that you'll take a moment and give us a little feedback at the end of the presentation.
So these are the important questions we're going to be talking about today. We hear so much about 21st century skills and what businesses are looking for when they hire. And people have been sharing some of those. We all use a lot of the same terminology. But frankly, I'm not sure what good it has done us. If we really understood them, I think we would be doing a better job at developing them. Since many of the skills are not related to specific job content, which employers provide training on all the time, then the question is, can they actually be developed? And if so, how? That's the big missing piece in this whole picture. Enough of what skills I need. Tell me how to get them. Don't keep telling me what skills my workers need. I get that part. How do I help them develop them? And finally, U.S. organizations spend billions on training every year, but often can't figure out what good it has done them. Is the problem lack of training effectiveness or the lack of ability to learn? So we're going to be exploring and hoping to bring a little bit of clarity and purpose to the picture of 21st century skills today. This is a wordle of an article on 21st century skills. It doesn't help us much more than the various frameworks that organizations have developed, but it does reinforce why we care. It's about employers and workers, about jobs and careers. It really is about our recognition that today we don't really know what the jobs of the future will be. This is a chart that summarizes a variety of different frameworks that have been developed for 21st century skills. Many of these are things that you have mentioned: critical thinking, problem solving. I'm playing with my little toy here so you can see this, communication, and those sorts of things. I think that professional work ethic is another one that definitely came up. So a lot of us really sort of understand you know, what they are. We can identify them. But does that really help us? Just because someone has told us that critical thinking and problem solving and decision making and research are analytical skills, what does that really do for us? And then I also start to think, is leadership somehow separate from the other skills on this list? Doesn't leadership require critical thinking and problem solving and decision making and communication and initiative and flexibility? And, well, you get the idea. So in order for this not to become a big so what, we believe we need to understand both the what and the how, what the skills are and how to develop them. First, let's clarify one of the reasons that we're talking about these skills. One of the participants today commented on a lack of skills among millennials, but in fact, it's not just millennials. Across the board, there are there's plenty of documentation of the lack of the products of our educational system. Most high school graduates are deficient in most of these skills, and a substantial portion of two-year college graduates are lacking in multiple areas. It's not until we get to a four-year college degree that we find 80 to 90% possessing these critical skills. And it is still the case that a quarter lack communication and leadership skills. And the importance of all these skills is only increasing. All of the skills identified in common by the frameworks are actually, according to businesses and others who rank them, increasing in importance. The ones that didn't appear in the conference board list, which is what we're looking at here, aren't mentioned as increasing just simply because nobody asked if they were increasing. So these are getting to be ever more important. And that the gap between worker preparedness and the demands of employers and the needs of employers, that gap continues to widen. I find it remarkable that it's not just hiring managers that see the gap. This is research that was done by the University of Phoenix, where they actually interviewed and surveyed workers. Workers themselves see this. They find the same dearth of critical skills, with only 30 to 40% of employees saying that their colleagues actually possess the ability to learn new skills, to problem solve, to communicate, to analyze. The highest ratings go for subject matter expertise, so that's sort of like the job content. But these other skills, only 30 to 40% of people who have already been hired, who are already working in the, and certainly some of these skills are subjective, and who is tracking it. But I think when you see such a broad consensus, it ought to make us pay a little bit of attention.
It's just logical then that employers are today looking for higher levels of academic attainment in their recruiting efforts. The fact of the matter is colleges less and less are looking at challenged populations to bring them into their schools. The data from the job site Career Builder, if you will, and their survey of employers show that 37% are requiring a college degree. Now, what's interesting about that, this is not work or capabilities. You don't need to have the capabilities of a college degree to do the work, but the employers are demanding it because of these types of skills that people with higher degrees come with: collaboration, working, thinking, problem solving, and they're just not seeing it with some of the other populations. And frankly, they can. They can make these demands, so they are making these demands, and so it's becoming more and more challenging across the board. And the reasons match up with the skills. If you, and less well-educated employees with communication and innovation among the reasons. If you just take a look at high-quality worker productivity, which is critical, communications with the new millennials today, everything's about collaboration. In the old, they like to call the baby boomers the old cowboy days. You know, you had the boss and the thinking people creating the agendas, doing the creative problem solving, and then the worker bees would actually execute and make that happen. But that's not the way it's working today. More and more people, due to all the information, are collaborating, and they want collaboration from everybody. So your ability to write and articulate and communicate are becoming critical. Innovation, employee retention. How do you retain employees? And customer loyalty programs. All of these things are being impacted and driving greater results. Personally, as a CEO for more than 30 years, it's clear to me that these skills relate directly to the bottom line. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story. We were in a workforce, we're doing some things with the State Department of Indiana workforce, and we were in a presentation, and we were talking about what we were doing. And a gentleman raised his hand, and he said, "I really don't have a question, Mr. Stark. I have a comment." He said, you know, we spend a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of good money with these grants and things that we get together in developing workers. And we send them to these jobs, and we get them where we think we need to have them. And before the 90 days is up, either the worker quits or the employer lets them go. And in the case of the employer letting them go, it was really disturbing to us. And matter of fact, I got quite mad about it. So, and after I got over being mad about it, because I was saying these guys are just taking our money and they're not respecting us, they're not respecting these workers, they're not giving them proper due respect and consideration for what we're attempting to do. We started to do a little deep dive and do a little research. What was really going on? And it's just like you speak about today, Roger. What we got consistently from employers is people's lack of comprehension skills, lack of memory skills, lack of processing skills, lack of attention skills. These are the most critical things that they cited as the reason they couldn't work with many of our people on an ongoing basis. And as we all know, everybody can hide in a job for 90 days. But as they began to look at this, as they said, they couldn't focus, they couldn't concentrate, they couldn't comprehend and training, they couldn't retain the information that they had learned, and they couldn't apply what they had learned. In other words, it was about the employee's ability to learn. It's all about the capacity and their perspective of the employee's ability to learn, because they got the subject matter experts. Another way to look at this is the modern workforce runs very largely on the cognitive abilities of its workforce. An analysis performed by OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is one of the most prestigious think tanks in the world that looks at these big issues. They said the data was very striking. How much our workplace actually runs on the cognitive ability of our workers. And that's just absolutely critical. So what we have here, if you look at OECD, and this is a great telling story, they began to look deeply at how do you connect these dots with economics and education and some of the biggest social challenges that we face today. And it became very clear to them that if we could raise every child in America to the minimum proficiency level of the PISA scores, the minimum proficiency level. Some of you may or may not know the PISA scores, but that's an acronym for a mechanism that we use to compare and contrast our ability to teach reading, writing, and math in the United States compared to other countries. And you've also heard that we do not fare very well. And we can talk about those scores a little bit because I don't think they're fairly represented. In America, we put everybody in our bucket. Not everybody in the world does that. And I want to draw a distinction. Any school district you find less than 10% poverty, or any school that you find less than 10% poverty, our students do as well as anybody in the world. So we got some really good teachers, and we got some really good curriculum. But when we start to hit into some of these other areas where it's not quite so affluent, the problems become more pronounced. But they said if we could take and raise every child in America to the minimum proficiency level of the PISA score, the minimum. I'm not talking about Finland. I'm not talking about Sweden. The minimum proficiency level. We would uncover, hold on to your seats, $73 trillion of GDP. $73 trillion of GDP for the United States alone. The whole world's only about $75, $77 trillion. That really gives us the ability to deal with some of our real challenging issues here at home. And it's a pretty amazing opportunity to do that. But they also very clearly call out what our biggest obstacle is that prevents us from ever having an opportunity to achieve those goals. We got the teachers, we got the curriculum, everybody's working hard, but the one single obstacle that they call out is not one single, but one of the greatest obstacles that we must be able to overcome to ever have the opportunity to even attempt to strive for this goal. And that's the lack of cognitive development. They lay it right at the foot of cognitive training.
So we want to talk now about cognitive skills and try to provide a helpful and illuminating way to talk about the relationships among all these skills. At the top of the pyramid here are the goals that we have as educators and trainees and as individuals in our lives. We want to get as far as we can in our education. We want to be able to have a career that is satisfying and that enables us to support our families. We want to be healthy. We want to stay out of jail, all of those kinds of things. That all requires knowledge and skill directly relevant to our career choice, whatever individual career choices we make. And underpinning those are basic competencies like reading, writing, and the ability to use technology. So far, these are pretty familiar concepts. But I want to jump down now to the bottom of the box because this really does build up like a pyramid. The rest of this really underlying piece is about the cognitive infrastructure that we need to learn to read, to do math, to do all of the other things that build on top of that. So the box at the bottom contains mental processes. These are often referred to as cognitive skills that are some of the most basic things that our brains engage in. Things like attention, visual processing, sequential processing, auditory processing. These are the basic ways we get information into our brains from the outside world. So remember, attention, Roger mentioned, was one of those skills, one of the reasons that employers said that they can't keep people because they couldn't focus, they couldn't concentrate, they didn't have the attention skills. And that's one of the cognitive skills that's at the very foundation of our ability to learn. The next two boxes refer to cognitive skills that are now being called executive functions. Many educators are hearing about these days because they are highly correlated in experiments and things like that with all of our higher order cognitive process, as well as academic performance, workplace performance, health outcomes, all the rest of it. And notice that everything in the higher order executive functions box looks a lot like the 21st century skills we started with: reasoning, problem solving, planning, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity. These are essentially what it looks like, the list of 21st century skills that we started with. And in fact, everything is also on those lists, but implicitly, these are explicitly, the higher order executive functions are explicitly on the list. The core executive functions are only implicitly on the list. And while neuroscience research has begun to clearly show what the role of these mental processes are, both the foundational cognitive skills and core executive functions, we've started to name them and to characterize them to show their importance. But as educators or employers, we haven't had much time to worry about them, and we haven't really started talking about them and what they mean and why they're so important.
The challenge becomes with these, what we call these foundational skills and core functioning, executive functioning. Everybody, it's kind of like air. Everybody assumes that everybody has them. If you take a look at somebody and they look physically okay to you, there doesn't seem to be any issue, and possibly if they're not attaining what you feel they should be attaining or remembering or comprehending, they're just not working hard enough. They need more grit. They're not trying. They're trying to be challenging, difficult, hard to go along with. But that's just not true. That's just not true. For example, since we've sat down here and all of us are talking on this webinar, I bet you not one time have you thought about the fact, was there going to be air there once you exhale? As you're breathing, you're exhaling and you're inhaling, and in a very non-conscious level, you just assume the air is going to be there. You just assume it. You don't consciously think about it. And that's the same thing with these foundational cognitive skills. Everybody assumes that they're there. And in fact, when you look at how we look at things historically, most people came to school prepared for good curriculum and good teaching. These skills were in place. But if you don't come from a highly loving, caring, nurturing, supportive, engaging community, these skills get stunted. And they're not always developed at the same level, so they're not ready for good teaching and good curriculum. And if you don't deal with these first, it's going to be a challenge. These are not the types of skills that lend themselves to direct instruction. And what do I mean by when I say direct instruction? It simply means that I can't explain to you how to sustain your attention, how to take in more information at a glance, or to maintain the appropriate pacing, or to speed up the connections in your brain. But it will turn out that these skills can be developed with the right kinds of cognitive training. And that will provide the foundation for all other learning processes. It's just tweaking it a little bit. You know, it's not about we got to change everything we're doing, but I think there needs to be a little bit of a shift. And I look at shifts kind of like the hinges on a door. We got some pretty good stuff. We just need to shift some of our priorities of how we help everybody get to where we need to go. And what Betsy's going to do for you in the next several minutes is explore three of these skills. We have limited time, so we're going to look at three of them. One is foundational, one is going to be core executive function, and one is going to be a high order executive function. Kind of provide you with a little bit of an opportunity to become aware of what they are and how they enable other skills, as well as how they are developed.
Sorry, I muted my microphone for just a moment. Sorry about that. So the first skill I want to focus on, and there's a pun intended there, is selective attention. There are actually a number of different facets of attention, and this facet of attention, selective attention, helps us focus on certain features of our environment and screen others out. Information comes in through our senses, or our eyes and ears and taste buds, turn information into electrical signals that activate neural networks in our brains. Most of the information we are exposed to is simply discarded right off the bat. We have limited ability to take it in, so probably only less than 10% of the potential information that we're exposed to actually gets in and spends any time in our sensory memory. Pretty quickly, our brains have to decide what's important, and they just drop the rest of it. Our ability to do this efficiently is selective attention. Sometimes we think we must be taking in everything around us, but that's not the case. Sometimes it is critical, sometimes in a work environment or a study environment or a school environment, in all kinds of situations. Thinking about listening to an announcement at the airport or whatever. It's critical to screen out distractions. Like this coffee filter keeps unwanted coffee grinds from getting into our cup of coffee. So we're going to take a look here at a short example of selective attention in operation. And what I need to do now is share this. It's a short video. Okay, so that is an example of our ability to be selective about our attention. We may then miss aspects of the environment, and sometimes that's important. But if we do that efficiently, and just need to get back to the presentation here, we're going to be much better off. We have to be able to really screen things out. In fact, sometimes with many kinds of attention disorders, many children with ADHD, the problem is not sustaining their attention, it's actually screening things out and being selective. So that ability to focus, to concentrate, to really pick out the important things is what selective attention is all about. The next cognitive process I want to explore with you briefly is working memory. And we're going to add on to the simple model we started earlier. We get that information through our senses. It sits for a brief moment in sensory memory. And then if we're going to get it into long-term memory, we have to use our working memory, and it plays a really essential role in getting that information into long-term memory, which is, of course, how we learn things. As we saw a minute ago, our brains have to decide if the information we are taking in is something we need to know or think about. If it is, we will further process it, and we do that in working memory. Working memory is a little bit like a work table where we set out all of the information we need to work on. Some of it may be new information coming in that was just been in sensory memory. Other pieces of information we may be retrieving from long-term memory. And we put all that stuff, at least sort of conceptually here, on our work table so that we can assemble it, move it around, and do what we need to tackle that project. Working memory is the only conscious processing we have. So sometimes we have to assemble a lot of information when we're thinking about a complex problem. So what we're going to do now.
All right, are we ready? All right. Okay, what we're going to do now is give you an opportunity to use your own working memory. It's going to be a little test as a way to help you understand this concept a little clearer. When we turn to the next slide, you're going to see some numbers and letters. You'll have just a few seconds to memorize them. So is everybody ready? Okay, here we go. Now, just take a moment to see if you can memorize this sequence. If anybody did, send us a little chat note. I'd love to see what you have to say. Oh, okay. All right, very good, Tammy. All right, Bill. Bill's awake. All right, oh, man, we got him. All right. Okay. All right, you guys, you know what? Doesn't surprise me. You guys are very bright, capable people, and that's great. So now, since we realize how bright everybody is, let's kind of kick the game up just a little bit and see how quickly you can do this one. All right, now I'm going to, once again, I'm going to see if you can remember these numbers, and they have to be in sequence. And as I just told you in the past, you just did this, 74B85. And if you can recall it, give yourself a head on the back. We'll try something a little harder next time. All right, let's try to memorize this sequence.
Oops, it wasn't supposed to be that fast.
All right, here we go. I'm going to give you about 5-10 seconds here. All right. Okay, how many of you can remember this sequence?
Pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah.
Pretty close.
Right.
Pretty close. All right. Pretty close. All right. Well, here's the deal. Now, if you can you remember that sequence? Unless you have a photographic memory, you probably can't. And don't feel bad. You're normal. Or if you did do it, you might have done it using some work accommodations, as they say, chunking. Most adults, they can manage to hold about 7 pieces of information in working memory in their mind, plus or minus 2. 7 to 9 pieces is about where we stand. But that list was a little bit longer. It was 10, and it can't be easily remembered by most of us. That experience might give you some feeling for the experience a student or a trainee has when they have limited working memory. Some people are comparing working memory now being more important than intelligence. So it's something that you have to have today is good working memory, especially with all these collaborative groups that the new millennials are working at. Working memory capacity is developed, but not everyone has developed their working memory to the same degree. If you have a student or trainee whose working memory capacity is only, 3, 4, or 5 pieces of information, then that's going to limit their ability, if you will, to learn and to perform many tasks that would you expect them to do. If information can't be managed in working memory, remember, it will just be discarded. Discarded. Now, let's take a look at how skills like selective attention and working memory can actually be developed.
Okay. So as Roger just explained, these skills, in fact, all of the skills in that pyramid of skills that we looked at, from the foundational cognitive skills up through those executive functions, are partly developmental. That means that our ability to do them is a combination of genetic factors and our experience. Our brains develop in interaction with our environment, and often the environment may not have provided a rich and supportive bunch of material to develop our skills to their potential. But that doesn't mean that we're just stuck with what we've got, and it doesn't mean that we're hopelessly condemned to diverting our attention to every butterfly outside the window or ring of our cell phone. And it doesn't mean that we can't get a bigger work table in working memory to fit more pieces of information on to work with. So what we're looking at here is the results of peer-reviewed published research on the impact of cognitive training on some of the skills we've just been talking about. So in this research, the students were divided into a control group and a study group. The control group went about their normal activities, and the study group used a cognitive training program called BrainWare. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. We have a second study we're going to share with you as well. And these were students who were known to have deficits in cognitive processes. They had specific learning disabilities. Now, on these cognitive skills, and these are just some of them, we're not going to show you all of this research today, but we wanted to key in on some of the ones that we've been talking about. 90% is the level that is normally developing. And you can see that on the pre-test, so before using the cognitive training experience, these students were quite low, way below 90% proficiency in these skills. You can see how low they were in verbal working memory, in short-term memory, in their attention skills, all those basic processes, of course, that start the learning process. And you can see that after the period of time, this was actually an intervention that went on for 12 weeks, 3 to 5 times a week for 12 weeks with the BrainWare cognitive intervention. And afterwards, across the board, they're getting up very close to, or sometimes even surpassing the level that is considered to be normally developing in these skills. So these skills can actually be developed, they can be remediated, and one of the most important things that we start to observe is the impact and how this translates into everyday functioning and academic progress. In this research, I can tell you that the improved cognitive skills led to dramatic improvement in academic performance. There was 0.8 of a grade equivalent in reading and a full grade equivalent in math in just 12 weeks. Now what we're going to do is look at the same cognitive training program, but this time in an oil refinery in California where it was incorporated as part of that.
Yeah, this training program, what you're seeing here is council operators in an oil refinery. They have a two-step. This is an oil company, so they don't need a lot of help in helping them identify people that they think fit the skill sets for the job requirement. And the first time you're hired to take the training. Now, the training is over about an 8-week period. They tell us it costs about $140,000 to train a council operator. At the end of the training, they take in about 25 or 30 at a time, typical. And they usually lose 2 to 3 that do not pass the test, because at the end of the training, you have to take a proficiency test. And if you don't pass at a certain level, you do not get hired. So if you're losing 2 to 3 of those each time around in each cohort, that's you're talking $400,000 or $500,000 that you just tossed away. So they hired us to come in and work with their people, and they did the training 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week, first thing in the morning. And an amazing thing happened. And the reason this all came about is that their industrial psychologist had a child that had some issues, and she reached out to us, and we did some work for her. And she was so impressed, but she said, you know, with the new workers that we have coming in today, we see some of these same challenges, their ability to pay attention, their ability to comprehend and to process information. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. So they wanted to see what this might look like with some of their trainees. And the reality is, when they came in, they paid us very, very little money, and everybody passed. And I think they did a second cohort, and they did it again. The next time around, we just finished, and one of them did not. But it was a pretty dramatic turnaround and a very profitable. Somebody said earlier about being expensive. Yeah, they had to spend some money, but what they got on the return, it's about the ROI. And that's what we're excited about, because it appears to us that there could be an enormous ROI on an investment of this nature. Betsy?
Yes. All right. Sorry,
Hello?
I muted myself because I was laughing so hard at Bill Lawrence's jokes that I didn't want to interrupt you. But so let's talk a little bit about the study itself. The measures in this study included a cognitive assessment called the GAMMA. which is a nonverbal test of various aspects of cognitive processing. Your ability to recognize patterns, processing speed, working memory, all those kinds of things. And then also we were able to look at the results of the trainees on the 3 measures that the oil refinery uses to determine whether or not they're successful and can be hired. These included their weekly tests of learned material, a field evaluation with the supervisor, and a final exam. So there were 2 groups of 25 recruits that went through the training program with BrainWare, cognitive training software, and then there was 1 comparison cohort that just went through the regular training program. So this is a chart that summarizes the results. What you can see here is the blue bar and the green bar, which represent group 1 and group 2, the 2 groups that went through cognitive training as part of their overall training for the oil refinery. The comparison cohort, which is the gray bar, did not. On the gamma, 86% of the trainees improved their IQ, which is one of the scores and outputs of the gamma test. And this is remarkable because if you take an IQ test and then you take it again, you're liable to score very similarly. Sometimes you might go up a little bit, sometimes you might go down a little bit, and the odds of going one way or the other are about the same. So when you have such a large majority of them actually improving their IQ, we know that there's something going on, and you could see this across the various subtests of the program as well. You can also see that on the cumulative test, that is their weekly test of the material. The 2 cohorts who used cognitive training were performed significantly better. On their field evaluations, they performed significantly better. And the really dramatic difference is on that final written exam, which of course is cumulative. It's what you're supposed to remember, everything that you've learned. It's over the period of time. And this is exactly what we were talking about before when employers weren't keeping people because they just couldn't retain the information. In this case, instead of losing a number of individuals through the training process, almost all of them, all but 1 in the case of the cohorts that received cognitive training, were successful in getting through and getting hired by the corporation. Savings on the order of $500,000 or more and a return on investment of 1,000%.
So let's just talk for a moment. If in fact this is something you want to look at or you want to try to have a greater understanding, I think first of all, when you look at a cognitive training field, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. You hear about brain games and things of that nature. We work very diligently to stay away from that, and the research that we're talking about is based on cognitive training. But it's a very specific type of cognitive training that's been developed over 40 years. It started with 2 clinicians working with over 400 to try to really understand what drove the greatest intellectual growth in the shortest period of time that was sustainable and transferable. So the number 1 thing you want to look at those skills that are at the base of that pyramid. It needs to be comprehensive, and the research that we've talked about today was based on a very comprehensive program and highly integrated in how the skills are developed. It's very, very important. Progressively challenging, it's got to be motivational. And I'd like to say a couple of words about evidence-based. You hear a lot of people talk about things, well, it's evidence-based. Well, but it's important to distinguish between being evidence-based, which means the practice employs the general principles of what has been shown in research on an actual cognitive development tool itself. You want to see the impact both on the cognitive processes, that's critical, and it's also critical that they need to be able to demonstrate transfer to the things that really matter in real life or school or on the job, the actual skills that we talked about earlier that employers so desperately need and want. Be skeptical. I think skepticism is the engine of truth. I advise everybody to be skeptical. You're probably a little skeptical here, and that's healthy. Don't be what we call uninformed dismissive. Uninformed dismissive, we believe, is the engine of disaster. We need to explore, we need to do research, and it's a continual process of trying to be the best we can be.
Okay, so the last thing I want to do, because we said we were going to talk about 3 different skills, is to explore one of those higher order executive functions, and the one that's getting a lot of attention in the workplace today, these days, creativity. First of all, of course, creativity is very complex, and it can involve a lot of mental processes working together. There are lots of hypotheses about what it is and where it operates in the brain, but very little scientific consensus at this point. And I would question whether there is actually a lot of consensus in the rest of the world about what it is. But the truth is that it probably happens all over the brain, and it's distant parts of the brain working together, different parts of the brain working together. But still, every human being is creative. Whenever I doubt this, I only need to think about the fact that every human utterance is a new thing that didn't exist before. If you think about the things that you've been typing into the chat window, or the last thing that somebody said to you before you joined the webinar, odds are that it was a novel creation. But we typically mean more than that when we talk about creativity in the workplace. So one of the, I suppose, first questions to ask is why we even care. Why do we need creativity? We need creativity because we have problems to solve. New problems, difficult problems, big, hairy, daunting problems, problems that no one has ever solved before. What kind of problem do you think this was designed to solve? Or this? See that coffee cup drip being caught along that ledge on the side? Or this? Or this? Here, just in time for your summer vacation, is the sandless beach mat. I have no idea whether it works, but the problem it addresses is obvious. And then there's this answer to an urgent problem. Well, maybe not. To me, this looks like a solution in search of a problem. But the point is that all of these ideas come from somewhere. And there's actually a process that can be used to foster this kind of creativity. Oops, I skipped a slide. The process is called design thinking. And the process and the name originally were developed at Stanford University. It's essentially a process that helps you create options that you might not have existed before, that you might not consider without it. The process starts with the user. Oh, I am just having trouble with my slides today. Okay. It involves direct observation, a lot of qualitative data, and lots of stories. Telling stories is a really important way, and it increases the likelihood that you actually get to the crux of a problem. So you watch the user using things. You tell stories. You hear stories about what worked and what didn't and what problems are. Why not just ask people how to make things better? Well, if Henry Ford had asked people what they needed, the answer would probably be a faster horse. But of course, it was really something else that they needed, although his solution addressed the very underlying problem. If you had asked people how to improve a CD player, which this is a picture of, you might have gotten suggestions like making it lighter weight, having a longer battery life, the ability to hold more CDs perhaps, and those kinds of things. But if instead you ask people about stories, you ask and watch how they use the device and how the device interacts with the other things that they use, you can start to get a deeper understanding of the problem in a way that will suggest a different set of options. If we understand the problems and remove them from the context of the existing solution, other options emerge. Okay, so it's expensive. I have to buy CDs, I have to buy batteries, I have to buy a new CD player when it breaks. Bulky, obvious. Limited selection, one CD and whatever else I can carry with me. Limited playtime. Do you remember when we were on that airplane stuck on the tarmac at O'Hare? And those are the kinds of stories that you'll hear when you ask people about their the products and the services that they use. And that really helps suggest other kinds of solutions. Understanding the real problem helps options emerge, like this: iPod and iTunes. Then you get to the stage in the design thinking process where you have a concept or a potential solution, and then starts the process of prototyping. You develop a quick prototype, you get reaction to it, you see how it works, and over time you keep iterating the prototypes to eventually develop and more fully address the solution to the underlying problem that you've identified. When you do this iteration over and over really increases the likelihood that the solution will be powerful and that the product or service or process that emerges from it will fully address the problem, and that it will be innovative, something that people haven't thought of before. The point is that we can all innovate. We can use processes like design thinking that can be learned and improved with practice, that can result in more creativity and innovation in the workplace. And we've worked with a number of companies, and when I teach in my MBA program, we spend a session on design thinking, letting the students really experience that.
Okay, let's see if we can pull all this together and kind of put a wrap on this and see if we can't, in fact, create something of a blueprint, if you will, for 21st century worker. Everything when you're building starts with a foundation. And if the foundation is not right, it's just like engineering. If it's off a little bit, you're going to have real struggles trying to make everything work. And as I talked about earlier, when you talk about cognitive skills, those are the foundational skills that enable people to think and to reason and to problem solve. And if we don't have those foundational skills and the core executive function skills, it's going to become a challenge, a big, big challenge. So, so build the foundation first. Foundational cognitive skills and core executive function skills. Do not make the assumption that everybody comes to work or comes to school with the same skills. In every research study that we've done, we found over and over again that that is one of the critical points that needs to be addressed. If you're going to, everything else is heavy lifting if that's not working properly. As I recall back just earlier speaking with you today, the OECD report, they said the #1 challenge we have in front of us is we must overcome the lack of this cognitive deficiencies that we have today. And once you get there, then you can start to look at integrating and developing other construct knowledge, basic literacy and numeracy skills. I was just reading today, less than 25% of our high school about 22% of our graduating high school seniors cannot read their diploma. 20% of them can't even read their diploma, and yet they got a degree. Now, if you're in workforce and that's the product you got to work with, you've got some real challenges. You have some real challenges. So foundation, knowledge, integrate, develop, understand, we can all create. As I say, there's a genius inside each one of us trying to find his way out. So with the foundation in place, everything else begins to work. So once again, here's our architecture, rendering of the finished building, the pyramid of cognitive skills that are needed for the 21st century worker. And that foundation must be there, must be there. We're really good at teaching literacy and numeracy and technology and all these other things, but so often that's the point that's being missed. That's the critical gap. Based upon our research, now we've only got about 30 studies, only 30 studies. We need more research. But as Einstein said, I can have 100 studies, but if I get one wrong, then everything I talk about is wrong. And so we work very diligently to help work with our people, to be very flexible, and to try to work together and engage the challenges of making these things happen so everyone has an opportunity of a life of choice versus a life of chance.
And just to underscore what Roger was talking about, I drew these arrows in that sort of makes the point that, we try in the workplace and in our education systems to teach literacy, teach numeracy, teach business literacy, teach job skills without the benefit of knowing whether this cognitive infrastructure is really solidly in place. So we believe that this helps to sort of connect the relationships among these skills, that executive functions and higher order thinking processes, which include all of those 21st century skills, are not just a matter of something that's an adjunct to or nice to have, but that are really part and parcel of building the infrastructure that will help us and our colleagues and our children be successful. So at this point, we do have a little bit of time left, which is great. We always try to do that. We would certainly welcome your questions and comments. Please feel free to type them. And it looks like we're getting a number of questions. So Patty asked where we can find your studies. All of the studies, all of our research is posted online. If you go to www.mybrainware.com, and if you go down to the bottom of the page, there's a menu or navigation system, and just click on research, and that will take you there. They're all posted there if you want to check them out.
One of the things that I want to say, someone asked a question, does education today contribute to the deficiency in cognitive skills? I don't know if I would say it that way. I would say it is our thinking that we see a lot of great teachers working really, really hard, and we see a lot of students working really, really hard. And when you talk about some of our more challenged populations, such as special education, Title I, at-risk, ESL, we have now spent $22 trillion since the 60s, since President Johnson declared war on this population. And absolutely, statistically, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. So I don't think it's a lack of hard work and effort and commitment, but I think that accidentally, if you will, we're institutionalizing failure because we don't empower our teachers with the tools that they need to deal with the problems that they have. So what we try to do is to help people have an opportunity to be the best they can be. And that's by enabling, but what do you do to teacher effectiveness if you deliver a classroom full of students better prepared to learn?
And I'd like to answer that same question, Roger, but I may not be quite as gentle as you were in terms of the education system. And I'm not putting this at the feet of teachers either. But the system that has evolved, which promotes to such a tremendous degree the concept of teaching to the test. And there were some comments earlier about standardized testing. And the problem is that when we teach the test, we encourage memorization. We encourage a lot of rote kinds of responses. And what that does is it really fails to provide an environment for the development of some of the kinds of 21st century skills we've been talking about. You're not going to develop critical thinking skills if you're not asked to think critically. You're not going to develop collaboration skills if you're sitting at your desk trying to cram for the exam, and you have to do that all by yourself. So I do think that there's some institutional factors. I certainly don't want to blame hardworking teachers or hardworking students, but I think that the education system itself does in some ways contribute to these deficiencies and to the fact that we have students graduating without the ability to really tackle the big problems that we have in our workplaces.
I think another key point, I spent a lot of time with various neuroscientists and psychologists and some of the world's best. And one of the things I'm constantly told, Roger, don't wait for the research. We're talking about people's lives. You're doing something right now that can change and be transformative for people's lives. You're more than a cognitive training tool. You are a community revitalization tool. If we wait for the research, thousands upon thousands, if not millions of lives will be lost to a life of destitution with no hope. And the only thing they'll have for themselves is hope. That's about it. There's not going to be, it's not going to be choice. It's just going to be by chance. So go and go fast and help as many people as you can. And so that's what our mission is. We're on a missionary mission to help people have an opportunity to be the best they can be.
Great. Well, we do have time. I can't promise I've gotten every question. there is a little bit of discussion of time frame and what it takes to invest in cognitive training. It's actually surprisingly little time, but there is a little bit of magic to it. The protocol, the typical protocol that was used in the studies that you saw today, I think I mentioned that was using the program for about 12 weeks. The usage of 3 to 5 times a week for 12 weeks in 30 to 60-minute sessions is the magic. It's the kind of frequency and intensity. That was one of the criteria that Roger referred to earlier in terms of what effective cognitive training really needs to have. But if you think about that, if you think about even just 30 minutes, 3 or 4 or 5 times a week for 12 weeks, and the kind of impact that this can have on a lifetime, it seems like it's a pretty great return on investment for that kind of time. So hopefully that answers. Okay.
Well, it's a gift. It's a gift that keeps giving for a lifetime. Now, I have to be honest with you. We talk a lot about sustainability and transfer. If once you've been through this therapeutic training, but that's what it is, a very unique clinical cognitive training tool, and you don't do anything and you just go smoke dope for 6 months and lay down, it's not going to stay. But if you're actively engaged, it's going to work with you throughout time. We don't have time here, and we don't want to bother people, but you'll certainly have an opportunity if you wish. We're going to send you the slides. We did record the presentation. We'll let you have access to the recording. And if you determine this is something you want to look at or consider, there's lots of ways of doing that. And if you'd like to have a demonstration, we certainly can set that up as well. Any way that we can help and be accommodating, we want to be as flexible as we can to work around your schedule and your challenges. But I think you should look at it. And if you're not going to do something or explore something in this area, you need to be real clear as to why you're not.
Great. It looks like there may be. If we've missed the questions, we will go through afterwards when we pull the chat log and make sure that we've either caught questions. If there's something that we didn't think we answered, we'll try to get back to you. And of course, let me actually do that final slide so you have our contact information. We're both available, both love to hear from you, love to continue the conversation if that's something you would like to do. So here's contact information for me and for Roger. And we're getting so many interesting questions here. I feel like the earlier conversation about the attention skills. So psychiatric nurse practitioners training. I don't honestly know. We have worked with a variety of teacher training programs and some undergraduate and graduate therapy training programs, OTs, speech and language pathologists, those kinds of things. I don't know that any of this has been introduced in psychiatric nurse practitioners training, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah, but we work with obviously neurologists and speech and language clinical psychologists, lots of different. We're in about 700 clinics around the world. Whatever it's worth, we're in all 50 states.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, well, we really want to thank everybody for spending some time with us today. We really, really appreciate it. Again, when you leave the webinar, you will probably get you should get a little thing where you can click a number of stars, and 5 stars is better than 4 stars, so et cetera. And, you know, if you have other feedback or anything else, we certainly hope you will share it with us.
All right.
Thanks so much. See you again soon.
Bye-bye.